What if I told you that the moment your twin flame walked out of your life was not the moment you lost them, but the moment you were finally given back to yourself? Most people are told that twin flames are meant to reunite. That separation is just a phase. That if you heal enough, if you wait long enough, if you love deeply enough, they will come back. And so when they leave, the mind immediately translates it as failure. I wasn't enough. I didn't heal fast enough. I ruined something sacred. But what if that entire story was never the truth? What if their leaving was not abandonment, but intervention? Because there is a kind of leaving that doesn't come from rejection, but from necessity. And this is the part no one likes to talk about. Sometimes, your twin flame doesn't leave because they don't love you. They leave because loving you has turned into a way for you to abandon yourself. Let that land. Not dramatically, not spiritually bypassed, just honestly. When they were in your life, where was your center? Was it inside you or inside them? Did your sense of peace come from your breath, your body, your inner knowing, or from their presence, their attention, their messages, their reassurance? Because there is a moment on the twin flame journey that looks like love, but is actually self-erasure. A moment where the connection becomes the sun, and you quietly orbit around it, forgetting that you were once a star too. And the soul does not allow that to last. Not because it is cruel, but because it is precise. The soul does not punish, it corrects. So when your twin flame leaves, it is not always because the connection failed. Sometimes, it is because the lesson was completed. And the lesson was never about them. It was about this question: can you still choose yourself when the person who awakened you is no longer here? That question is terrifying, because as long as they stayed, you didn't have to answer it. You could say, I'll come back to myself later, when things stabilize, when we reunite, when this pain ends. But when they walk away, there is no more delay, no more spiritual excuses, no more waiting rooms disguised as destiny. Just you, and the silence, and the sudden realization that you don't actually know how to live without orienting yourself around someone else. This is why the pain feels unbearable, not because you lost them, but because you lost the structure that kept you from meeting yourself fully. Most people misunderstand twin flame separation because they interpret it through the lens of romance. But twin flame connections are not romantic contracts. They are initiation rituals. They exist to strip you of every false center you've ever built, including them, especially them. If your twin flame had stayed forever, you might have continued to outsource your worth. You might have continued to confuse intensity with truth, longing with purpose, attachment with destiny. And the soul refuses to let awakening stop there. So it removes the mirror, not to punish you, but to ask, now that the mirror is gone, can you still see yourself? This is where many people collapse. They try to manifest the person back. Instead of integrating the lesson, they call it faith. But it's fear. Fear of standing alone in their own presence. Fear of discovering that the love they were chasing was something they were meant to generate from within. Because here is the paradox no one warns you about. The deeper the twin flame connection, the more dangerous it becomes. To make it the center of your life, not because it's toxic, but because it's powerful. And power must be held with sovereignty, or it consumes you. Your twin flame didn't leave to hurt you. They left because your soul was ready to stop bending toward another and start standing upright in itself. They left because the next phase of your evolution could not be accessed while you were still waiting for someone else to validate your existence. And that is the moment this journey truly begins. Not when you meet them, not when the connection ignites, but when they walk away, and you are forced to ask, who am I? When no one is choosing me, except myself. If this question unsettles you, that's not a sign you're broken. It's a sign you're standing at the threshold. Because awakening does not feel like light at first. Feels like groundlessness. Like everything familiar has been removed, and nothing new has replaced it yet. And that is exactly where truth enters. In the next part, we will talk about why placing your twin flame at the center of your life was never meant to last, and how that collapse is not the end of love, but the beginning of self-return. Stay with me, because if they walked away from your life, it may be because you were finally meant to walk back into yourself. There is a phase on the twin flame journey that almost everyone passes through, but very few recognize while they are inside it. It doesn't look like obsession. It doesn't look unhealthy. In fact, it often looks spiritual. It looks like devotion. It looks like surrender. It looks like love that is bigger than the ego. But underneath it, something subtle is happening. Very slowly, you stop being the center of your own life, and you don't notice it, because it doesn't happen all at once. It happens quietly. You wake up thinking of them before you think of yourself. Your mood for the day is shaped by whether you dreamed of them, felt their energy, or sensed their distance. Your nervous system becomes tuned, not to your own inner rhythm, but to their availability. If they are close, you feel alive. If they pull away, you feel hollow. And none of this feels wrong, because the connection feels sacred. You tell yourself, this isn't attachment. This is soul recognition. This isn't need. This is divine love. But here is the question almost no one asks. If this love is so divine, why does your life shrink around it? Why do your dreams, your creative fire, your sense of self, begin to orbit around another person? Why do your boundaries soften, your priorities blur, your inner voice grow quieter? This is where the twin flame journey becomes dangerous. Not because the connection is false, but because it is powerful. Power amplifies whatever is unresolved inside you. And if there is an old wound, a wound of abandonment, of invisibility, of having to earn love, the twin flame does not heal it. They activate it. Suddenly everything feels urgent. You analyze signs. You replay conversations. You search for meaning in silence. Not because you are weak, but because the connection has touched a part of you that learned long ago that love means survival. So without realizing it, you begin to center your life around them. Not intentionally, not manipulatively, energetically. Your body waits. Your heart listens. Your future imagines itself, with or without them, before it imagines itself as whole. And here is the most important truth. The soul does not judge this. It understands exactly why you do it, because many of us were never taught how to be the source of our own safety. We were taught to attach, to adapt, to bond in ways that ensured connection. So when a twin flame appears, someone who feels like home, truth recognition, the nervous system mistakes resonance for refuge. And slowly, you start living as if the connection is the ground beneath you. But the ground was never meant to be another human being. That is too much weight for love to carry. This is why twin flames destabilize us, because they reveal where we are still standing on something outside ourselves. And the soul cannot allow awakening to rest on an external center. So what happens? The center collapses, not violently, not as punishment, but precisely when your twin flame pulls away, goes, chooses another path, or becomes unavailable. Feels like the ground disappears. You panic. You grieve. You feel unmoored. But the real loss is not them. The real loss is the identity you built around the connection, the version of you who knew who they were, only in relation to someone else. And that is unbearable to face, because if they are no longer the center, then something terrifying emerges. You are. And many people don't want that responsibility. Being the center means feeling everything directly. It means meeting your loneliness without a buffer. It means choosing yourself without external confirmation. It means discovering who you are when no one is mirroring you. So instead, many people chase reunion, not out of love, but out of fear of self-confrontation. They say, I just want the connection back. But what they really mean is, I don't know how to live without orienting around another. And the soul hears that. And the soul says, then you are not done yet. This is why reunion does not happen when you are still centered on them. Because reunion at that stage would reinforce the very imbalance. The journey came to heal. The twin flame is not meant to replace your center. They are meant to expose that you never had one. And this is the moment of truth. Can you let the connection stop being the sun so you can become your own source of gravity? Can you stop asking, what are they feeling about me? And start asking, what am I feeling in my own body right now? Can you let the silence teach you instead of trying to fill it? Because when you reclaim your center, something profound happens. The obsession dissolves. The waiting ends. The nervous system settles. Not because the love disappears, but because it is no longer starving. Love that is centered within does not beg, does not chase. It does not collapse when someone leaves. It remains. And only from that place can a true soul connection exist. In the next part, we will explore what happens when the twin flame leaves and the empty space finally reveals what was always missing inside. Because that space is not a curse. It is an invitation. And everything depends on whether you run from it or enter it consciously. Stay with me. When your twin flame finally leaves, not just physically, but energetically, something strange happens. First, it feels like loss. Sharp, sudden, all-consuming. But if you slow down enough, if you stop narrating the pain and simply feel it, you realize something unsettling. The pain is not only about them. It is about the space they leave behind. A vast echoing silence that you don't know how to be with. Because when they were there, that space was filled with anticipation, with longing, with meaning. Their presence, or even the idea of their presence, gave shape to your days. It gave your emotions somewhere to go. So when they leave, feels like something inside you collapses. But here is the truth most people miss. That space did not appear when they left. It was already there. They were simply standing in front of it, covering it, distracting you from it, giving you a place to project everything you had never learned to hold inside yourself. Loneliness, unworthiness, fear, the quiet belief that without being chosen, you do not fully exist. These feelings did not begin with them. They began long before, often in childhood, often in moments where love felt conditional, often when you learned subtly or directly that connection could be lost at any moment. The twin flame does not create this wound. They illuminate it. And illumination is painful, because once the light is on, you can no longer pretend that the emptiness is someone else's fault. This is why separation hurts more than any other kind of breakup, because it is not just the loss of a person. It is the loss of a distraction from your own inner absence. When they leave, you are left alone with questions you've never had to answer before. Who am I without longing? Who am I without waiting? Who am I when no one is coming to save me, choose me, or complete me? These questions feel brutal. They strip away spiritual fantasies. They strip away romantic narratives. They strip away the idea that love will arrive and finally make life feel whole. And many people panic here. They rush to fill the space with new connections, with spiritual explanations, with manifesting rituals, with endless analysis of signs and synchronicities, anything to avoid sitting in the void. But the void is not your enemy. It is the most honest place you will ever meet yourself. Because the void does not demand performance. It does not care who you were to them. It does not respond to effort. It does not reward spiritual language. It only asks one thing. Can you be here without reaching? Most people cannot. They confuse presence with stagnation, stillness with emptiness, silence with rejection. So they interpret the void as proof that something has gone wrong. I've lost my purpose. I've lost my direction. I've lost the love of my life. But what if the void is not loss? What if it is exposure? Exposure of a life that was never truly centered within yourself. Exposure of a self that learned to exist through reflection rather than embodiment, exposure of a nervous system that equated intensity with aliveness. When your twin flame leaves, your system goes into withdrawal, not because they were the source of love, but because they were the source of stimulation. And without stimulation, you are left with raw presence. This is why it feels unbearable. Presence without distraction forces you to feel what was always there. Grief you never processed, anger you never expressed, needs you never learned to meet. And underneath all of it, a deep ancient longing to finally belong to yourself. This is the moment most people misinterpret. They say, "This pain means I need them back." But pain is not always a signal to retrieve. Sometimes, it is a signal to remain, to stay with yourself, even when nothing is filling the space. To stop asking, "How do I get them back?" and start asking, "What is this space asking of me?" Because the void is not empty, it is fertile. It is the ground from which a real self can grow. Not a self built around longing, but a self rooted in presence. But that growth requires something rare: willingness to be incomplete, without reaching for completion outside yourself. This is where the twin flame journey separates those who awaken from those who remain stuck in the loop. Those who awaken enter the void consciously. They stop chasing explanations. They stop romanticizing pain. They stop waiting for signs. They begin listening to the body, to the tightness in the chest, to the restlessness in the gut, to the grief in the throat, not to fix it, but to stay with it. And slowly, something extraordinary happens. The void stops feeling like absence, starts feeling like space. Space to breathe, space to feel without interpretation, space to exist without being seen. And in that space, a new orientation begins to form, not toward another person, but inward. This is the beginning of self-return. Not self-love as a concept, not affirmations, not spiritual ideals, but embodied presence, being with yourself, without agenda, without hoping the pain will lead somewhere, without using healing as a strategy to be chosen, just being here. This is why many twin flames never reunite, not because the connection was false, but because one or both people never entered the void fully. They kept trying to fill it, instead of letting it transform them. Because if you let the void do its work, it will take everything that is not real, every false identity, every borrowed sense of worth, every version of you that existed to be loved, rather than to be lived. And what remains is not empty, it is grounded. In the next part, we will explore what happens when you stop running from the void and begin rebuilding your life from the inside out. Because the twin flame does not leave you to destroy you. They leave so you can finally meet the self you abandoned long before they arrived. And that meeting is the real union. There is a quiet moment that comes after the panic has burned itself out. It does not arrive dramatically. It does not feel like victory. Most people miss it because they are still waiting for relief to announce itself. But it is there. It arrives as a subtle shift. You wake up one morning and realize you are no longer urgently reaching for your phone to check for signs. You still think of them, but the thinking is softer, less desperate, less sharp. Not because the love is gone, but because something else has begun to grow. Presence. This is the moment when rebuilding truly starts. Not rebuilding the relationship, not rebuilding hope, rebuilding yourself. And this part of the journey is the least talked about because it doesn't look spiritual. It looks ordinary. It looks like learning how to sit with yourself without narration. It looks like noticing how your body feels when there is no emotional high to distract you. It looks like confronting the rhythms of your own life that were neglected while you were oriented outward. When your twin flame was the center, your life organized itself around intensity. Now that intensity is gone, and what remains is structure. Structure feels boring to a nervous system, addicted to emotional peaks, feels flat, empty, uninspired. But structure is not emptiness. Structure is safety. And safety is what allows something real to grow. At this stage, many people mistake calm for loss. They say, "I don't feel the magic anymore. I don't feel alive. I don't feel connected to anything." But what they are actually feeling is the absence of chaos. For the first time, their system is no longer bracing, no longer scanning, no longer anticipating abandonment or reunion. And without that tension, the nervous system doesn't know who it is yet, so it feels dull. This is where patience becomes sacred, because rebuilding from the inside out does not happen through effort. It happens through attunement. You begin by listening to what your body needs, instead of what your longing wants. You eat when you are hungry, not when anxiety peaks. You rest when you are tired, not when the pain becomes unbearable. You move your body, not to release emotion, but to inhabit it. These are not spiritual practices. They are acts of reclamation. Because when the twin flame connection dominated your life, your body learned that safety came from outside. Now you are teaching it something new. "I am here," over and over again, without expectation, without promise of reward. This is why rebuilding feels slow. Because you are not chasing transformation anymore. You are stabilizing. And stabilization is deeply uncomfortable for people who learn to feel alive through longing. But something remarkable happens. When you stay, your inner world begins to organize itself. Your thoughts slow down. Your emotions stop spiraling. Your identity loosens. You are no longer the one waiting. No longer the one abandoned. No longer the one healing so they can reunite. You are simply a person, learning how to live inside their own skin. And this is where grief finally changes form. Stops being about them. It becomes grief for yourself. For the years you spent bending. For the dreams you postponed. For the parts of your life that were placed on hold. Because love felt more urgent than presence. This grief is quieter, but more honest. And it does not need to be fixed. It needs to be witnessed. So you let yourself feel it, without making it mean anything. You cry without storytelling. You ache without interpretation. And in doing so, you release the idea that pain must lead somewhere. Pain becomes sensation. Sensation becomes information. And information becomes choice. This is the turning point, because for the first time, you begin choosing yourself. Not as a reaction to loss, but as a foundation. You don't ask, "Will this bring them back?" You ask, "Does this bring me home?" This question changes everything. Changes how you work, how you rest, how you relate. You stop performing healing. You stop curating spiritual identity. You start living. And living is not glamorous. It is repetitive. It is grounded. It is human. But it is yours. As you rebuild, you may notice something unsettling. Your old desires don't fit anymore. The fantasies of reunion feel distant. The urgency fades. Not because you've given up on love, but because you've stopped using love as an escape from yourself. And here is the paradox. This is the moment when true connection becomes possible again. Not necessarily with them, but with life. Because connection cannot coexist with self-abandonment. It requires presence. It requires embodiment. It requires you to be here, without needing someone else to confirm your worth. This is why many people fear this stage, because it means letting go of the identity built around longing. And longing was familiar. Longing gave meaning to pain, but rebuilding gives meaning to existence. And existence does not revolve around another person. It unfolds from within. In the next part, we will explore what happens when you no longer need the twin flame to complete you, and how this shift transforms the very nature of love itself. Because the highest form of love is not union through need. It is connection through wholeness. And wholeness begins the moment you stop running and start inhabiting your own life. There comes a moment on this journey that is almost impossible to describe until you have lived it. It is not dramatic. It does not arrive with fireworks or clarity. It arrives quietly, in the absence of urgency. One day you notice that the question, "Will they come back?" no longer controls your breathing. You still care. You still feel something. But the need, the ache that once shaped your entire inner world, has softened. And this is where everything changes. Because up until this point, what you were experiencing was not love alone. It was love braided with survival, love mixed with fear, love entangled with identity, love carrying the weight of being the answer. And love was never meant to do that. When you no longer need your twin flame, it does not mean the connection was false. It means it has matured. It has shed the layer of desperation that came from believing you were incomplete without them. This is where many people get confused. They assume that not needing someone means becoming cold, detached, indifferent. But what actually happens is the opposite. Love becomes cleaner, quieter, less distorted by expectation. You no longer love them because they stabilize you, validate you, or give meaning to your pain. You love them because love exists, and that is a completely different frequency. Before, love felt like hunger, a reaching, a pulling toward. Now love feels like recognition, without grasping, presence, without possession. You are no longer trying to merge. You are allowing connection, without collapse. This is the highest threshold of the twin flame journey, and it is the one most people never reach, because reaching it requires letting go of the fantasy that love will save you. It requires accepting something far more radical. You are already whole, and wholeness changes the way love moves. When you are no longer centered on them, you stop monitoring the connection. You stop asking whether they feel you, whether they think of you, whether the bond is still active. Not because you don't care, but because your existence no longer depends on the answer. This is when love stops being transactional. No more. If they come back, I'll be okay. If they choose me, I'll relax. If they stay, I'll be complete. Love becomes an offering, not a request. And something subtle but profound happens here. The power dynamic dissolves. There is no chaser, no runner, no one holding the center. There is just two sovereign beings, connected or not, each standing in their own ground. And from that ground, anything becomes possible, including reunion. But here is the paradox that few are ready to hear. Reunion only becomes possible when you no longer need it, because need collapses polarity. Need pulls, need grips, need demands. Wholeness allows, and the soul responds to allowance, not pressure. This is why so many twin flame connections remain stuck in endless cycles. One or both people are still trying to get something from the connection, validation, healing, proof of worth, and the connection cannot stabilize under that weight, so it destabilizes over and over again. But when you step out of need, the cycle breaks, not because you tried to break it, but because there is nothing left to feed it. You are no longer waiting. You are living, and life has momentum. Life moves forward. You begin creating, not to distract yourself from pain, but because creation feels natural again. You form relationships, not as substitutes, but as expressions. You experience joy, not because someone returned, but because you are present. And here is the most surprising part. Love does not disappear. It becomes spacious. It becomes something that can exist without demanding form. You can love them without needing to speak to them. You can feel the connection without orienting your life around it. You can honor what was without trying to resurrect it. This is not detachment. It is integration. You are no longer split between longing and resistance. You are here, and from here, you are free. Free to meet love wherever it appears. Free to let go if it no longer aligns. Free to allow reunion if it happens naturally, but no longer defined by any outcome. This is the point where the twin flame stops being the axis of your spiritual identity, and you stop calling the journey a lesson or a test. You simply recognize it as a passage, one that led you back to yourself, And when you are anchored in yourself, love stops being something you chase. It becomes something you are. In the next part, we will explore what happens when you live from this wholeness, how your relationships change, how your perception of destiny shifts, and why the love you once feared losing can no longer be taken from you. Because when love no longer comes from lack, nothing external can remove it. And that is the truest form of freedom this journey offers. There is a quiet shock that comes after you stop needing your twin flame. Not pain, not longing, but surprise. Because life begins to respond to you differently. Not all at once, not magically, but unmistakably. When you live from wholeness, your energy changes before your circumstances do. And the world feels it. You no longer move through life as someone waiting to be completed. You move as someone inhabiting. And inhabitation changes everything. The way you enter a room changes. The way you speak changes. The way you listen changes. Not because you are trying to be different, but because you are no longer split. Before, a part of you was always elsewhere, waiting, wondering, tracking an invisible thread back to them. Now your attention returns to your body, to your breath, to your environment, to the moment unfolding in front of you. And presence has gravity. People feel it. They don't always know why. They feel calmer around you, more seen, more grounded, but they do. This is one of the great ironies of the twin flame journey. When you stop centering your life around connection, connection begins to appear everywhere. Not intense, not overwhelming, but real. You notice it in simple exchanges, in eye contact that lingers, in conversations that don't drain you. You are no longer scanning for meaning. You are participating in it. And because of that, your relationships begin to change. You no longer bond through wounds. You no longer feel pulled toward people who replicate old patterns of absence, distance, or inconsistency. Not because you are healed in some abstract sense, but because your nervous system has learned what safety feels like inside you. And once the body knows safety, it no longer mistakes intensity for intimacy. This is where destiny begins to look different. Before, destiny felt like something external. A person, a reunion, a cosmic event waiting to happen. Now destiny feels embodied. It feels like alignment between who you are and how you live. You stop asking, is this person meant for me? And start asking, does my body open or contract here? This question is far more honest, because wholeness brings discernment. You no longer override discomfort. In the name of love, you no longer sacrifice your rhythm to preserve connection. You honor resonance. And resonance does not demand self-abandonment. This is where many people grieve again, but differently. They grieve the version of love that was fueled by longing. They grieve the drama, the peaks, the ache that once made them feel alive. Because wholeness feels quieter, more subtle. And for a while, quiet can feel like loss. But if you stay, you begin to recognize something profound. Quiet is not empty. It is spacious. And in that space, life begins to meet you without distortion. Opportunities arise that do not feel like tests. Paths open that do not require suffering to validate them. You find yourself choosing differently, not because you are afraid of pain, but because pain is no longer your compass. This is one of the deepest shifts. When you were centered on your twin flame, your choices were driven by emotional charge. Now they are guided by coherence. What fits your nervous system? What supports your vitality? What allows you to remain present? And because of this, your life begins to stabilize, not into boredom, but into continuity. You build, you sustain, you deepen. This is where creativity returns, in a new form, not as catharsis, not as expression of longing, but as embodiment. You create because something wants to move through you, not because you are trying to fill a void. And what you create carries a different quality. It is less performative, less urgent, more honest. People respond to it differently, because authenticity resonates more deeply than intensity ever could. And here is the part that surprises almost everyone. Your twin flame energy does not disappear. It integrates. It becomes less specific and more universal. You may still feel them at times, not as ache, but as warmth, not as pull, but as recognition, and it no longer destabilizes you, simply exists, like a memory that no longer defines you, but helped shape you. This is why some people experience unexpected contact at this stage. Not always reunion, sometimes just acknowledgement, a message, a moment of clarity, and if it happens, you meet it differently. There is no rush. No spike. You do not abandon yourself to interpret its meaning. You stay where you are. Because now, you are the ground, and whether they return or not stops being the central question. The real question becomes, how do I want to live from here? And that question is powerful, because it is not oriented around fate. It is oriented around agency. This is the moment you realize that the twin flame journey was never about union with another. It was about initiation into self-authorship. You were not meant to be chosen. You were meant to choose your values, your boundaries, your pace. And from that place, love no longer feels rare, feels natural. It appears in friendships, in work, in moments of stillness. You stop compartmentalizing love as something that belongs to romance alone. Love becomes the tone of your life, and that tone is not dramatic. It is steady. It holds. In the next part, we will explore the final paradox of this journey, why the twin flame often returns only after you have fully moved on, and why, at that point, the return no longer defines you, because the deepest awakening is not reunion, it is freedom, and freedom is what allows love to exist without fear. There is a paradox at the heart of the twin flame journey that very few people are prepared for. It is not that reunion never happens. It is that when it does, it happens at a moment when it no longer matters in the way it once did. This is difficult to accept, because for a long time, reunion felt like the destination, the imagined moment, where everything would finally make sense, where the pain would be justified, where the love would be proven real. So when you stop waiting for it, a quiet question arises. Was all of this for nothing? And the answer is no. It was for this. For the moment when reunion, if it appears, meets a version of you who is no longer suspended between hope and fear. A version of you who does not organize their life around the possibility of someone else's return. Because waiting is not neutral. Waiting freezes time, keeps your body braced, your nervous system alert, your life slightly on hold. And as long as you were waiting, you were not fully available to yourself. This is why reunion cannot happen then. Not because the universe is cruel, but because it would anchor you back into the very pattern you were meant to outgrow. So the waiting had to end first. Not through force, but through fulfillment. You had to discover that your life continues, deepens, expands, without resolution. And only then does something shift. You stop tracking signs. You stop interpreting silence. You stop asking, what does this mean? Because your meaning is no longer outsourced. And it is often after this shift that contact appears. Sometimes subtly, sometimes unexpectedly. A message, a conversation, a moment of recognition. And here is the most important part. If and when it happens, you meet it without collapse. You don't rush. You don't spike. You don't abandon yourself to the old narrative. You stay present. Because now, you have a center. And from that center, you can finally see clearly what this connection truly is. Not a rescue. Not a destiny you must fulfill. Not a missing piece. But a relationship. One that either aligns with your life now, or does not. This is where many people are surprised by themselves. They realize they are no longer willing to sacrifice their peace for intensity. They are no longer willing to shrink their life to make space for a connection. They are no longer willing to return to old dynamics just because the bond is familiar. This does not mean the love is gone. It means love has boundaries now. And boundaries are not walls. They are clarity. Clarity about what you can hold, what you can sustain, what you will no longer abandon yourself for. So if your twin flame returns at this stage, they meet a different you. A you who does not need them to confirm your worth. A you who does not pause their life to interpret their presence. A you who can say yes or no without fear. And that is the true initiation. Because the deepest test of the twin flame journey is not separation. It is sovereignty. Can you stay yourself, even in the presence of the one who once unraveled you? Can you remain grounded when the old chemistry reappears? Can you feel love without letting it define your identity? If the answer is yes, then reunion, if it unfolds, will not destabilize you. It will be honest. And honesty is the only ground on which a soul-level connection can exist long-term. This is why some reunions last, and others dissolve quickly, not because the connection failed, but because clarity arrived. Sometimes reunion is meant to confirm growth. Sometimes it is meant to close a loop gently. Sometimes it is meant to be brief and true. And sometimes it does not happen at all. But by the time you reach this stage, that outcome no longer defines you, because the journey has already given you what you were truly seeking. Not the person, but yourself. This is the part many people misunderstand. They think the twin flame returns as a reward, but it is not a reward. It is a reflection. It reflects how deeply you can stay present without losing yourself. It reflects whether love can move through you without consuming you. And if it does not return, that too is a reflection of completion, of integration, of a chapter that fulfilled its purpose without needing continuation. This is where peace settles in. Not the kind of peace that comes from certainty, but the kind that comes from trust. Trust in yourself. Trust in your life. Trust in your ability to meet whatever comes without collapse. And from this place, you no longer ask, is this my twin flame? You ask something far more grounded. Is this aligned with who I am now? That question changes everything. Because alignment does not chase destiny. It lives it. In the final part, we will bring this journey together. Not as a theory. Not as a belief system. But as a lived truth. Why the twin flame does not leave your life to take something from you, but to return you to the one place you were always meant to stand, yourself. There is a point on this journey where love stops asking for anything. No confirmation, no promise, no future projection. Simply exists. And this is the highest frequency most people never reach, because we are taught quietly, deeply, that love must do something. It must bind. It must secure. It must last. So when love no longer clings, the mind panics. It asks, if I don't need them, does this still count as love? And the answer is uncomfortable. This is the first time it truly does. Before this stage, love was always tied to survival, to identity, to purpose, to belonging. Even when it felt spiritual, even when it felt transcendent, there was still a subtle contract running underneath. Stay with me so I can remain whole. But at this stage, that contract dissolves. Not because love disappears, but because it is no longer asked to carry what it was never meant to hold. Love stops being a container for fear. And when fear leaves, love changes form. It becomes spacious. You no longer feel pulled toward the other person. You feel open. You no longer scan the field for their energy. You feel anchored in your own. And paradoxically, this makes connection possible in a way it never was before. Because now, you are not reaching across a gap. There is no gap. You are whole where you stand. So connection does not bridge absence. It meets presence. This is where many people misinterpret what is happening. They think they are falling out of love. They worry that something sacred is fading. But what is actually fading is dependency. And dependency is not love. Dependency is fear dressed as devotion. When that dissolves, Love is free to become what it always wanted to be. An expression, not a necessity. You may still feel your twin flame, but the feeling is no longer sharp. It does not interrupt your breath. It does not destabilize your mood. It arrives like a memory of warmth, not something you must act on. And this is the strange part. At this frequency, love does not demand proximity. You can love without contact, without explanation, without continuation. Not because you are avoiding intimacy, but because intimacy no longer requires possession. This is the kind of love that does not insist on form. It does not need labels. It does not need timelines. It does not need to be seen to be real. And this terrifies the part of us that learned love through attachment. Because attachment says, if it's real, it must stay. But soul-level love says, if it's real, it can move. And movement does not threaten it. This is why, at this stage, your relationship to loss changes. You no longer interpret endings as proof of failure. You no longer see separation as abandonment. You see it as motion, as life rearranging itself, without malice. And because of this, your heart softens, not into vulnerability that bleeds, but into openness that holds. You become less guarded and less desperate. At the same time, you can let people in without giving yourself away. You can let people go without hardening. This is emotional maturity at a spiritual level, and it cannot be rushed. It emerges only after you have faced the deepest fear underneath love, the fear that without attachment, you will be alone. But at this stage, you discover something radical. You are not alone. You are accompanied by yourself. Your body feels inhabited. Your mind feels quieter. Your life feels connected, even without a central figure. And from this place, your love becomes non-exclusive, not in the sense of lacking commitment, but in the sense of abundance. You stop believing that love only arrives once. You stop seeing people as replacements or threats. You see connection as something that flows through many forms, and each form is allowed to be what it is. This is why jealousy dissolves here. Not because you suppress it, but because it has nothing to defend. You are no longer competing for existence. You exist, and existence is enough. This is the frequency where the twin flame label falls away. Not because the experience wasn't real, but because it no longer needs a name. You no longer ask, who are they to me? You ask, how does love want to move through me now? That question is alive. It adapts. It responds. And it does not anchor itself to the past. At this level, you realize something quietly profound. Love was never meant to be the axis of your life. Presence was. And love is simply what presence feels like when it meets another presence. No hunger, no fear, no collapse, just recognition. And recognition does not require possession. It requires truth. This is the highest frequency of love. This journey offers not reunion, not permanence, but freedom with warmth, connection without need, love that does not bind, but blesses. In the final part, we will bring this entire journey home, not to an answer, but to a truth you can live from. Why the twin flame leaving your life was never a loss, but the moment you were returned to yourself as a complete being, and why that return is the greatest union you will ever experience. There is a moment of recognition that does not arrive through insight alone. It arrives through integration, through time, through lived experience, through the quiet accumulation of choosing yourself again and again, until one day something clicks. Not emotionally, not spiritually, existentially. You realize that if your twin flame had stayed, you would have disappeared. Not all at once, not obviously, but slowly. You would have continued to orbit, to adjust, to compromise parts of yourself that no longer wanted to bend, and you would have called it love, because you didn't yet know what love feels like when it does not require sacrifice of self. This realization is not bitter. It is sobering. because for the first time, you see the leaving clearly, not as abandonment, not as rejection, not as unfinished destiny, but as precision. Something in life intervened at the exact moment when the connection could no longer take you forward. An intervention does not always look gentle. Sometimes it looks like loss. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like a door closing without explanation. But what was really happening was not punishment. It was redirection. Your twin flame did not leave your life to take something from you. They left to stop taking something from you. Your attention, your center, your becoming. At the time, you could not see this. All you felt was rupture, because the mind interprets endings through attachment. But now, standing where you are, you can feel the truth in your body. If they had stayed, you would have stayed the same. And the soul does not choose stagnation. This is where gratitude begins to replace grief. Not the forced gratitude that tries to bypass pain, but a grounded gratitude that emerges naturally when you see the full arc. You remember who you were when they were the center of your life, how small your world was becoming, how narrow your focus had grown, how much energy was spent monitoring, interpreting, waiting. And you compare that to who you are now, the way you move through life, the way you make decisions, the way your body feels inhabited. And the contrast is undeniable. You didn't lose love. You gained yourself. This is the moment when the narrative finally dissolves. The story of the one who got away. The story of the unfinished union. The story of the lesson that still needs closure. You no longer need these stories because you are no longer trying to make sense of pain. The pain already did its work. It stripped you down to what was real. And what was real was never the connection itself. It was what the connection awakened. Your capacity to feel deeply. Your hunger for truth. Your intolerance for half-lived lives. Those qualities did not belong to them. They were always yours. The twin flame was simply the catalyst. And catalysts are not meant to remain. They are meant to initiate reaction, then step aside. This is why the leaving had to be final, in the way it was. Because ambiguity would have kept you tethered. Hope would have kept you waiting. And waiting was the last thing your soul needed. So life removed the option, not to be cruel, but to be clear. And clarity, in the end, is the greatest kindness. This is where forgiveness completes itself. Not forgiveness of them, but forgiveness of yourself. For the time you spent believing that love must hurt to be real. For the years you invested in longing rather than living. For the ways you abandoned yourself without knowing you were doing so. You do not judge that version of you. You honor them because they did the best they could with the awareness they had. And without that version of you, this version would not exist. This is also where blame disappears. You stop asking, who failed? You stop assigning roles of runner and chaser. You see two people meeting each other at the edge of their capacity. One connection, one moment in time, perfectly imperfect, exactly enough. And from this perspective, the twin flame journey stops being special. Not in the sense of losing meaning, but in the sense of no longer needing to be elevated. It becomes part of your life story. Not the headline, not the climax, but the turning point, the chapter where everything changed direction. This is how you know the journey is complete. When you can speak of it without tightening, when the memory no longer pulls you backward or forward, when it simply rests like a landmark you pass through on the way to somewhere else. And where you arrived was not reunion, it was embodiment. You arrived in your own life, fully, without waiting, without bargaining, without needing an answer from anyone else. This is the greatest reframe of all. The twin flame did not leave you so you could become spiritual. They left so you could become real, so you could inhabit your days, your choices, your limits, your desires, so you could stop postponing life for a moment that was never meant to come. And now, As you stand in this recognition, there is no urgency, no longing, no unfinished business, just a quiet knowing. Nothing was taken from you. Everything was returned. In the final part, we will close this journey, not with an answer to hold on to, but with a truth you can live from. A truth that does not depend on connection or separation, but on something far more stable. The fact that you were never meant to find yourself in another person. You were meant to come home to yourself and meet the world from there. There is no dramatic ending to this journey, no final sign, no cosmic confirmation, no moment where the universe announces that you have passed the test. Instead, there is something quieter. You wake up one day and realize that you are no longer searching for yourself in anyone else's eyes. You are no longer measuring your life by who stayed, who left, or who might return. You are simply here. And for the first time, that feels like enough. This is what coming home actually feels like. Not excitement, not certainty, but grounded presence. The kind that does not need to be named, to be real. This is where the idea of union finally dissolves into something much truer. Union was never meant to happen between you and another person. It was meant to happen between you and yourself. Every part of this journey, the meeting, the intensity, the separation, the longing, the collapse, was orchestrated for this one outcome, to return you to your own center, not as a concept, not as an affirmation, but as a lived state. You are no longer divided between who you are and who you are trying to be for love. You are no longer split between presence and projection. You are whole where you stand, and wholeness does not need proof. This is the point where the twin flame story ends, not because it was wrong, but because it has fulfilled its purpose. You no longer need the label to validate the experience. You no longer need the explanation to justify the pain. You no longer need the outcome to give meaning to the journey. The meaning is embodied. It lives in the way you breathe now, in the way you make decisions, in the way you no longer abandon yourself for intensity, for hope, for love that costs you your ground. This is what freedom feels like. Not freedom from love, but freedom within it. You can love without losing yourself. You can connect without disappearing. You can let go without hardening. And this is the greatest integration of all, because when you are home in yourself, nothing external can take that from you. Not separation, not silence, not loss. You have learned how to remain, and remaining is the deepest spiritual act there is. This is why, at the end of this journey, there is no promise of reunion, because promises belong to the mind. What you have now belongs to your being. If someone comes into your life from here, they will meet you, not your longing, not your wound, not your unfinished self. They will meet presence. And presence does not chase destiny, it lives it. This is also why the twin flame does not disappear from your story. They simply change place. They are no longer the center. They are a chapter, an initiator, a threshold you crossed on the way to becoming yourself. And you do not need to revisit the threshold to honor the crossing. You carry what mattered forward. This is the moment when you stop asking spiritual questions and start living spiritual answers. You stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start living the response, "So I could be here, in your body, in your life, in your choices, not waiting, not reaching, here." And if you are listening to this, and something inside you feels calm, steady, recognized, that is not coincidence. It means a part of you already knows this truth. You were never meant to find yourself in another person. You were meant to meet yourself so fully that love could move through you without fear. That is the true union, not with a twin flame, but with life itself. So if this journey resonates with you, if it put language to something you have lived but never been able to name, stay, not here, in yourself. And from that place, let your life unfold. not as destiny waiting to happen, but as presence, already alive. This is not the end, it is the return, and from here, everything you live will be real.